פה יש מקומות גבוהים פה בכיתה ברור. פה זה עוד יותר. פה זה כבר עם מאמץ, זה לא... איך קוראים עם בסדר, היום הגענו... לא יודעתי כמה זמן אתה צורך למה כמו שבניין אותי. הרבה יותר. כמה שאתה משעמם אחרי שיש עשרות כאלה. אוקיי, בסדר, אחד, עשרה ראשון. זה מתיש, מתי שאתה מתחיל להיות קצת חוקר על עצמו, אבל בסדר, הולך לצורך.
מה נשמע?
Speaker, and Enrico is an assistant professor in history of philosophy at the Technion. He held previous positions at Bogliasco Foundation of Genoa and Harvard Center for Italian Renaissance Studies. Specializes in ancient and modern philosophical thought and its intersections with philosophy of science, medicine, psychology, theology, and ethics. His research interests include atomism, hedonism, medical theory, philosophical theology, scientific poetry, and theory of performance. So a wide range of interests. Yeah. He has so far published 2 books. One is titled, it's a rough translation, so I don't know Italian, so I just estimated what it was, History of Ancient Atomist Theologies, and Amicus Lucretius, which is probably a reference to...
Yeah, it's you know the proverb amicus Plato.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's mimicking
Gassendi is amicus Lucretius. Okay, Gassendi, the Rerum Natura in Christian hedonism. So I'm very honored to welcome Enrico, and the title of his talk is The Science of Magic, Atomistic Spells in Bolus of Mendes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Firstly, do you hear me well? Okay, good. And also in the back, I see also people. So if I can reach even people in the back, it's the right tone. I'm very happy for the invitation coming from the colleagues, and if I dare say friends, because in my opinion, the personal and humanistic perspective is they tend to coincide. And actually, although it's not your fault, I decided to change the subtitle of the presentation of today, which as you will see from the handout, which is shared to you. And I apologize in advance if there are a lot of pages and text, but because my work is mainly on the history of philosophy and focused on the evidence and the text. And as you will see, the problem of studying ancient atomism is that we don't have extant works, but only fragments, indirect evidence. So it's like sometimes to make a coherent reconstruction and claim, we need like some pieces of the puzzle to make different evidence coming from different time and places to try to make a reconstruction which is both solid from the historical and philological perspective, and if possible, interesting from the philosophical point of view. And as I was saying, I decided to change the titles, the subtitle, which is Bolus of Mendes and its Democritean inspiration, basically because when I submitted the talk to Shaul and Ori, I was making a too big promise to think that in the case of Bolus, we can strictly speaking speak about atomism. So as often happens when you do research, you often narrow your ambitions and also your results. Again, thank you for this, and I apologize that I will try not to take into anything for granted. So I know that not necessarily the people, I don't think that Bolus is, so to say, a very no figure, and so I will try also to give some coordinates, and I apologize either if I say something sometimes that you might already know, or on the other hand, if I take for granted something. Just this to say also that I would like to postpone the discussion for bigger aspects at the end, but if there are some problems in the presentation, so you wanted to make questions about the clarifications and so on, please interrupt me anytime. Okay, the talk is also I wanted to introduce a little in the broader research that I'm trying to carry out in the Technion and also in cooperation with other international partners. This is a big part of a bigger project which, without too much imagination, I titled Digital Atomism, Democritus and the Democritean Reception. The focus, as the key terms say, is on the ancient atomism, and particularly on the more ancient atomism, the one of Democritus, Leucippus, and other figures. I say this because there is a lot of scholarship on the later atomism, the atomism of Epicurus and Lucretius, which is technically called the Hellenistic atomism, the one ranging from the second half of the 4th century until, let's say, the 3rd century AD. But there is much less scholarship in the most ancient atomism, and particularly about its reception. On the other hand, it's also digital, because my ambition is to collect the fragments, because, as I was saying at the beginning, unfortunately, the writings from the Democritus and the ancient atomists have been all lost, and we have only fragments and direct evidence. And so the idea is to make a new collection of evidence that even for Democritus, all the existing collections are incomplete. And in this presentation, I will also make one example for Democritus and one example for Bolus. So, so there is this idea of this is a first step of a more broader project. For today, I would like to focus on this Bolus of Mendes, who, as the first paragraph of the handout say, who is this person? And I would invite you to have a look to text 1.1 and text 1.2. These are two fragments preserved by the lexicon Suda or Suida, depends also on, does not matter in the audio, depends on audio, what kind of spelling that you use. And according to this Byzantine lexicon, Bolus of Mendes, there are apparently two boluses in the first one is, you see, Bolus Democritus, who is a philosopher who wrote about history and medical art. And this medical art was a work that was dedicated from remedies extracted from the resources of nature. So also this idea that the art, so to say, is extracted from an imitation or the discovery of secrets of nature. On the other hand, the other voice from the Suda, it speaks about, instead of a Bolus of Mendes, who is instead qualified as a Pythagorean, and who wrote works such as the Concerning Marvels, or the Peritaumasion, so to read also some Greek, or the Potent Remedies, and what will be important in this occasion, also a treatise, although here it's also an interpretative translation. It could be that this may not be a separate work, but you will see that this work from other sources is attested that exists. It's called the Peri Sympatheion kai Antipatheion, or on the sympathies and antipathies of stones in alphabetical order. And as I was saying, all these writings have been totally lost. This poses immediately a first problem, because you see that apart from the personal name, they have two different personalities. One, it seems to be a scientist, and is called Democritus, and later I will try to show why it's called not Democritean, but for this a little later. And the other is instead a follower of Pythagoras, and more a person who wrote about magic, about so to say supernatural thing, because also when there is the reference to the marvels is a reference to the marvels that are things that look mysterious, and you cannot really comprehend what the secret of the things that is described in what are the first. So this is a first problem, and in the previous scholarship debated whether these two are two different philosophers or intellectuals, or a single person. As it often happens, the evidence can, sometimes the contradiction depends on the fact that different sources refer to the same character with different qualities. As I will try to show, I think that I also agree with the previous scholars that these two boluses, so to say, are one and the same person. So we have a scientist and a magician at the same time. About the date, this of course is very difficult also to ascertain, to be very exact, because again we are speaking of people who left not many evidence behind them. But in the case of Bolus, we can say that probably Bolus lived in between the 4th and the 3rd century BC, because Terminus postquem is this evidence from Apollonius the paradoxographer, who is a so to say a collector of marvelous things of the 3rd century BC, that quotes at the beginning of his treatise on the marvelous history that one of his sources was this Bolus. And together with it, he quotes a passage from the On Plants of Theophrastus, which here is not proven that it's coming from Bolus. But if you read the text 1.4 of this another lexicon of Stephanus of Byzantium, this same passage is quoted by Bolus the Democritean. And so we can safely say on this, although most of the time we needed to be very careful, this parallel shows that this passage from Theophrastus comes from Bolus itself. So to say about the chronology, we can say that it is for sure after Theophrastus, because he quoted him, and before, or at least a contemporary of Apollonius, because it is the earliest evidence that we have. Also, we have also other evidence about Bolus, and in text 1.5 we have a later scholium to Nicander Steriac that I'm sure that you know it, but it was a poem about the venomous animals and its antidotes. And here, in relation to verse 764, there is a reference to the work on sympathies and antipathies. So you see that here this is a clear indication that this was a treatise of its own, where in this treatise was discussed a deadly plant from the Persians that was planted in Egypt, and because the Persians wanted to plant this plant in order to kill the Egyptians, but eventually it turned out that this plant in the earth of Egypt produced a sweet and healthy fruit, and so it turned out that a device that was intended originally to kill the Egyptians turned out to be good. Unfortunately, as I was saying, we don't know much more about this treatise. Other evidence that we have, I selected in the next page in passage 1.6 from Columella. Bolus of Mendes is also attributed to some sort of, so to say, engineering work of how to create a garden that can be protected from the dangers of the environment, and to create also a good environment so to grow some fruits of cucumber and so on. I will not go into the detail about this topic because again the intention is more to show his connection with the atomism and the atomism of Democritus. Last but not least, and as I was saying, all these texts so far that I quoted are present in the previous collections about Bolus. I discovered in my research instead a different, new source about Bolus, although you will see that it's the textual perspective is problematic. In text 1.7, Galen, in a treatise on the antidotes, book 2, he quotes, so to say, some predecessors that, and this is actually a second project in which I'm interested, but it's not the occasion to go in too much into the detail, but on people who used poetry to communicate medicine. And among these people, you find that there is, the manuscript actually says Oros o Mendetius o Neoteros, but according to a conjecture from Mas, it's a very old one, but still a very interesting one. He proposed to correct Bolus, Oros with Bolus, and if we accept this correction, we find another evidence about Bolus, and actually an interesting one, because it means that Bolus was interested in medicine, and so we have a claim that the Egyptian Bolus of Mendes is identical with the Bolus of the doctor or the practitioner, and also that he used poetry to convey this information or this knowledge. But since this is a very speculative, so if we don't accept mass correction, of course, this source has to be abandoned, but I just quote it for the sake of completeness and for your reference. So this basically is what we know about Bolus, and you see that it's not that much. However, this corpus of evidence can be enlarged by an interesting phenomenon that I'm sure for those of you who studied the history of alchemy has crossed in their research. Because there are some sources I omitted to mention in the work on, no, sorry, didn't omit, it was correct, that actually we have attributed to Democritus some works which, however, instead belong to this Bolus of Mendes. And the proof is that you see in passages 2.1 and 2.2 of the handout, we are moving to the paragraph 2 of the presentation. There has been a work called the Keirok Thema, or sorry, Keirok Meta, or Keirok Meton, depends on also how you decline it, and which we can translate like a end-brought products. So to say, this is a relatively rare word, which means, so to say, a handcraft production based especially on plants and on stones, and is used for therapeutical means. What is interesting is that Vitruvius attributes this work to Democritus, whereas Columella attributes this same work to Bolus of Mendes, that also making also provides the information that Bolus published this work under the pseudonym of Democritus. And he continues by saying also in this passage some evidence on how we can avoid creating a disease within the sheep that are in a household. So you see that here also there is also another problem. So we have seen that there are two boluses that it's difficult to ascertain if they are the same person. And then here we have another problem that this person wrote some writings publishing under the name of Democritus. So the question that I would like to address with you today is why this happened and why he precisely selected Democritus as his nickname. It's not only the other stage, we also, the work about the on the sympathies and antipathies of things was also attributed to Democritus. Still Columella, if you move to text 2.3 of the handout, again you see that it says that the philosopher Democritus wrote a work on antipathies and explained how women who have menstruations can kill the worms that are affecting the farm. So we don't have any other evidence that Democritus wrote this work on antipathy or on sympathies, and so it is very likely that also this work has been published by Bolus under the nickname of Democritus. It's better maybe to skip the other sources, actually continue to confirm. Sorry?
Are these writings by Democritus faked by him?
Yes, this is the point. So it's they were believed to be written by Democritus, and also some people believed that actually Democritus was the real author. For instance, in passage 2.4, you see that the work of the Piergiacomi was believed to be by Pliny to be Democritean one, whereas it was of this Bolus. So this actually happens more than often in the ancient tradition, that some writings were forgeries and attributed to authoritative people of the past. This happens, for instance, also in the Pythagorean tradition. So some works were not written by Pythagoras or by Archytas and Philolaus, were key members of the Pythagorean school. They were attributed some works which we know instead are later forgeries of the Hellenistic period. And this is one of the other examples. Did I clarify this point? Good. And actually also this happened about this confusion of these characters, although there have been also other authors who were more aware of this phenomenon. And apart from Columella, you can also see, although I will not read this passage, but just for your reference, that a later Byzantine writer, Theophylact Simulacra, actually distinguishes Democritus from Bolus. You see that here there is the list of sources, and in line 3 is mentioned the labors of Democritus, and later in line 6 there is the reference to Bolus. So just to say that later in the reception of Bolus and Democritus, many authors became aware of the difference between the characters. But if you want, we can postpone later on the discussion why maybe this distinction happened. Because now I want actually to, as I mentioned before, to make a historical and philosophical question. Why attributing this knowledge of magic, because also this handwriting products is also a work of magic, which it's better 1 second to return to passage 2.4, that Pliny refers that this work was written by Democritus, and there were, so to say, an inventory of plants used for therapeutical needs, but then Pliny ends to say, of all these plants, Democritus or Bolus adds also the magical names. So you see also that this work was in between medicine and magic. So the problem is, why attributing these works to Democritus? Not just because a simple answer will be, well, Bolus was not a key and important person, at least we can guess this since his works did not survive, and he wanted to give authority to his works by using a very important person to legitimize his work. This is not enough, in my opinion, because there will be plenty of other people who can be used as a nickname. Imagine Pythagoras could have been a nickname, or Theophrastus, or if you know also in the later tradition, Theophrastus was also used as a nickname for magic and scientific writings and forgery. Or even in the 16th century, I just mentioned the Theophrastus Redivivus, who is, of course, is not being written by Theophrastus, but attributed it to legitimate or give authority to this work. Or even the names of the gods. So why not using the name Hermes or Asclepius, the god of medicine, and so on. And especially this problem is more important because actually Democritus, the historical one, not the one hidden under the nickname, may have been against magic. And just to select some sources, in passage 3.2 of the handout, you see that Philostratus is referring of Apollonius of Tyana, that says that Democritus consorted with wizard, because there are also there are other sources that say that Democritus was a follower of the Magis and the Chaldeans, and so had interaction with these people, yet did not practice the art of magic. Also consider that this idea that Democritus was a follower of the Magis could have been also dependent on the impact of Bolus, who presents him as an author interested in magic. So you see also that it's very hard to sometimes distinguish what is fictional and what can be really attributed to Democritus. In passage 3.3, and you see that this is a source instead which is not collected in the existing collections of fragments of Democritus, and this is one example why a new collection is needed, because a lot of evidence is left out in the existing collections. A Roman writer, Gaius Solinus, actually refers that Democritus studied the nature of a stone called the Catokitis, and he said that actually this disputed the inner power of this stone in disputes with the magician. So to say that because this stone is a stone that if you take it, it remains stick to the end, and you will say this it means that it has some magical properties why it remains attached, whereas Democritus tried to rationalize this idea. And unfortunately, we don't know why, because Solinus only refers to this idea. But you see that the historical Democritus was in competition with the magicians. Finally, if you read the passage 3.4 from Strabon, the geography, you see that Bolus wrote this, among the other things, this writing on the marvelous things. And so the idea that magic is something outstanding that creates our wonder and so on. Democritus, actually, if we trust Strabo, says that it was among the people of wisdom who identified as the goal of the study, the investigation, the absence of nature, of wonder. You see that the key word in the Greek is ataumastia. So if Democritus was against the practice to make us wonder about nature, he actually has the opposite goal. Maybe we start, like Aristotle would later say, we start from wonder in the investigation of nature, but the ultimate goal is to remove the wonder and not to remain forever with a sense of marvel in front of the phenomena of nature. So you see that this is one of the examples why it's problematic that not only Bolus decided to use the name of Democritus, but actually it seems to have fallen into contradiction, because Democritus, at least the historical one, was not a magician. So again, the question is why? In my last 15 minutes, correct, is or maybe we can say 10, or I will try.
Go 15 or 20.
Okay, good. And I will, so far everything is clear, and I hope so. At least, as I said, if you have some problems in comprehension or that I'm not explaining well, please stop me anytime. So now the next step will be that we have seen that this Bolus, the doctor, and the magician were probably the same person. We have seen that he decided to use the name of Democritus as a nickname for his works on magic and medicine. And we have also seen that Democritus, actually the real one, seems to be in opposition to magic. So now the question is why instead Democritus could have been a good candidate to give authorities to this medical work. Firstly, it's interesting to note that although in the past was much more common, so today we have a very strict division of the fields that we study. So I imagine that today for people study philosophy, will not study medicine or will not study physics. All the people, everyone decides which curriculum deciding to follow. In the past, was actually the distinction between physics and medicine was much less strict, and in a way, philosophers, by practicing the knowledge of nature, were also practicing medicine. In the case of Democritus, we have actually strong evidence that he had a keen interest on medicine, and even that he was proficient in medicine. In passage 4.1, this is so to say also an anticipation of what will be developed later in the Epicurean tradition. You know that Epicurus believed that we do physics because we wanted to be happy, and so to remove all the sources of fears that make our life miserable. And so by studying nature, we can remove these forms of fear, and so to lead also a good and pleasurable life. In this case, Democritus is actually an anticipation of this, because according to Clemens of Alexandria, actually there is a type of Clemens name, I'm sorry, that says that according to Democritus, medicine cures the illnesses of the body, and wisdom, or Sophia, or depends also, we can also translate this as knowledge, removes the soul from its affection. So you see that Democritus had this comparison that philosophy is, so to say, a sort of a medicine of the soul. And so there is an overlap between the two fields. But we have also evidence, just to look at passages 4.3 and 4.4, that Democritus engaged with the technical details about medicine. That is, studied how the phlegmon is caused, so that's we could translate as inflamed tumor, and that this comes out from the phlegm, or one of the humors of the body, and so it means that he was interested in this topic, or that he was interested in the beating of the pulse. And actually here, if you want, we can go into the detail what this beating of the pulse is, but just to say, this implies that Democritus had a knowledge of the anatomy, and possibly also of the distinction between the arteries and the veins, and this, according to other sources, is connected also to explain the voluntary motion, but this is better to postpone if you are interested to the discussion. Or in fragment 4.5, this is one of the ethical fragments with of Democritus, which actually seems to be even a form of a diagnosis of or the medical sense. It says that sleeping during the day indicates a disturbance in the body, or distress, or indolence, or a lack of education in the soul. I'm sorry, I forgot the Greek, and this was my mistake. But the interesting fact is that, to say, starts from the symptom that people sleep during the day to infer the knowledge of a cause of an hidden one. This, in a way, it's also sort of a medical prognosis. And finally, we have, according to Cicero, the examples can be multiplied, but this is just a selection, that he also studied the examining the animals who have been sacrificed in order to discover if maybe a pandemic was going to start, because seeing the signs from the organs sacrificed, you can see if something is bad in the grass or in the waters, and so to infer the cause that a pestilence is going to happen, and even also to use this knowledge to forecast the pandemic and to anticipate and actually protect from it. But of course, this is again is not enough to say, because maybe this shows that Democritus could have been a good nickname for Bolus because he was an authority of medicine. But again, we could say, why not Theophrastus, for instance? Even Theophrastus was very interested in medicine and the, so to say, overlap between physics and medicine. And so this is, so to say, is a good premise, but is still not an explanation. My final explanation, and here I'm coming to the conclusion, that actually in the case of Democritus, you can find some claims that even though they are not magical in the strict sense of the word, are, so to say, on the one hand, describe processes that could have, are behind also the works of magic, and on the other hand, we have evidence that Democritus, in a way, to some spells and magical beliefs that were extant at these times were explained in an atomistic point of view. So the point is, and this is my main philosophical claim, that Bolus identified in the atomism of Democritus some theories that could be also applied to describe the magic and to give also, so to say, a scientific presentation of magic. That also explains the title of my talk today. So the idea that the sympathies and antipathies of things are a cornerstone of magic, so to say that the things, if there is an attraction, it means that there is a sort of affinity between the things or also the medicines that we prescribe. And the same for the antipathies. There is the antipathy is based on a sort of difference between the things. And this is exactly a point that you can find in one of the key theories of Democritus, which it does not explain in terms of sympathy and antipathy, but in terms of attraction and repulsions. And now there is also a tricky point from the methodological point of view, because you will say, okay, we know that Bolus used the nickname of Democritus to express this knowledge. How can we say that the sources that explain, so refer to sort of a magical knowledge of Democritus does not still depend on on Bolus? My claim is actually that we can find early evidence that are for sure anticipate Bolus, and so it's very likely that they belong to the historical Democritus and not to the later forgers. And the key evidence is Theophrastus, who again was before Bolus, and so if Theophrastus attributes something to Democritus, he does something so without the confusion that we will see later in the tradition of between Democritus the scientist and the Democritus the magician. In text 511, and it's preserved by Simplicius the comments to physics, Theophrastus claimed that one of the key epistemological and physical claim of Democritus is that by nature the similar is moved by the similar, and things that are akin move toward each other. And each of the shapes, and here shapes must be interpreted as atomic shapes, so imagine that the atoms need not only to explain how the things are made, but also the differences between the things. So the atoms have different shapes, like some atoms are triangular, others are circular, others have other different shapes, because these are required to explain the differences of things. If the atoms would have been the same shapes, you cannot describe and explain these differences. And these shapes, arranged in different aggregates, produces different dispositions. So you see, and of course it's not said also the dissimilar things repulse the dissimilar things, but this, so to say, is implied, because if the similar is moved or attracted by the similar, the dissimilar is instead repulsed by the dissimilar. Sextus Empiricus, which is a later source, but it seems to quote a fragment from Democritus, also refers to the phenomenon that if you go near the sea and you see the waves who bring the different stones in the shores, you will see that the stones gather together depending on the similarities that they have. So stones that have a same shape tend to go with the stones of the same shape, or the same for the sides. The little stones gather with the little stones, and the big ones with the big ones. And the same also for the animate things, that the pigeons stay with the pigeons, cranes with cranes, or we will say human beings stay with the human beings. Also, Democritus said, and this is the passage 513 of the handout, that Democritus also tried to explain that imagine something like this, that all of us are, and also this table, the computer, the water, and so on, is made of atoms and void. And the atoms, when we are affected by things, so if I see Ori or Shaul, I receive the atoms from them that are emitted by their bodies, and they impact my eyes, and so I have the affection of Shaul and Ori, and so that I can see them. In the case of Democritus, it was also very extreme because he believes that this stream of atoms not only bring the, so to say, external shape of the things, but also some internal properties belonging to the soul. Just to read part of the passage. Democritus says that the images, and here images means that this, so to say, it's the Greek is eidola, which so to say is the simulacra of things departing from the bodies. They come from everywhere, from equipment, clothes, plants, but especially from living beings by the effect of intense agitation and heat. They possess not only similarities of form modeled upon the body, but they also receive impressions of the motions and the desires of each person's souls, of his character traits and passions, which they carry along with them. And when they encounter people accompanied by these things, and so you see here a sort of a quasi-magical statement, they speak like living beings and announce to those who receive them the opinion of those who send them, their considerations and their impulsions. So just to make a silly, but I hope an example that I can clarify. If I see Ori who is sad, why I perceive Ori that is sadness? Because so to say, the atoms transmit these affections coming from his soul and impacting also my own soul. And maybe by seeing Ori sad, I'm also invaded by sadness because the sadness of Ori is also affecting me. And in this sense, you see also that it's a very materialistic claim, but also one that tries to explain something that also goes beyond the immediate perception. And this is the general claim. Now, since I have 4 minutes left, I prefer not to give all the examples, so that I found this work of attraction and repulsion that you can find in botany, for instance. Or it's interesting, the application number 2 is the long passage in paragraph 3 on explaining the case study of the magnet, that why the stone is the amber is attracted by the magnet, because the magnet, so to say, emits these simulacra that I said before. They enter into the amber, and since there is a sort of say a similarity between the magnet and the amber, they tend to be attracted, and since the magnet is more powerful than the amber is attracted and moves toward it. So you see, and this is actually a sort of explanation of the sympathy and antipathy in the magical tradition, because also this example of the magnet and the amber was used by later alchemists and magicians to say if the stone attracts, if the amber is attracted by the magnet, it means that they have a sympathetic relationship. Democritus would have explained in less, so to say, exoteric language, it's a form of attraction and not of sympathy. But this is why I claim that Bolus, instead using this logic of attraction and repulsion of things, could have attributed a sort of a magical knowledge to Democritus. Last but not least, and I conclude here my presentation, and I hope that it was interesting and not too much difficult to follow. As I mentioned before, there is also another line in the Democritus, so to say, science, so that he tried also to rationalize some superstitions and some sort of magical beliefs. One of these was the evil eye, that I'm sure that you know that there was already in the ancient Greece the idea that if I envy one person and I hate this person a lot, I can, so to say, curse this person and create to this person some harm. And one could be tempted to say, one who is a scientist will say, but this is a superstition, this is nonsense, and we just get rid of them. Instead, Democritus, according to, again, this theory of the simulacra that I described before, that the atoms not only bring the external shape of the body, but also the internal properties of the soul, are also emitted by, so the envious person, why the evil eye, so to say, could work. Because the envious person, exactly like this, let's to move to the very last text of the handout, the text 542, says that these images that or simulacra are emitted by envious people, and this share of sensation and impulsion, and when they hit the person which is envied, fill this person with the wickedness and malice of the same coming from the people who are envying the person. So just to say that the evil eye was, so to say, we could say a sort of spell who was directed to another person, is described in Democritus with the scientific sense. And again, this I think that when Bolus attributed his magical writings to Democritus, may have in mind this kind of theory behind him. So to conclude, we don't have evidence that Bolus was himself an atomist, but he was engaged with the atomism because he apparently had a knowledge of the science of Democritus, and used this science also to give some sort of not only authority but also scientific credibility to magic. And so in a way we could say that Bolus might have embraced a form of science of magic. I stop here. I hope that it was interesting and not difficult to follow, and I thank you for your attention.
Question to ask whether Bolus the magician and Bolus the scientist were one and the same person or not. You probably referred to a distinction that was valid at the time between magic and science.
Yeah.
In all the text that you provide, I don't see anything that would invoke like supernatural forces. It's all the exploration of nature. If you call that magic, then why Anaxagoras or Anaximander were not magicians also, or is it a question about?
Yeah. No, yeah, I thank you for the question. Actually, it will be better also to try to contextualize the intersection between science and medicine, the science and the magic, which is also as old as Hippocrates. I'm sure that you know the treatise from attributed to Hippocrates, the On Sacred Disease, where Hippocrates launches an attack to those magicians who say that I can, with the magical formula and so on, command the wills of the gods. So let's say the distinction between science and magic exists. And some philosophers or practitioners like Hippocrates were in opposition to these people who, so to say, in their opinion, were non-scientific. On the other hand, that's absolutely true in the sense that also to say that when you mentioned about Anaxagoras and Empedocles, some other later sources actually identified these physicists also with a form of magicians, so that their knowledge of nature sometimes was confounded with, so to say, esoterical knowledge of nature, which is not based on science, but on so to say, this form of like the sympathies or antipathies, which are based on a knowledge of nature, but something that the magician would have qualified as supernatural and not coming necessarily from the powers of nature. Also consider that using plants to make preparations, it means that you start from collecting resources from nature, but to assemble in a way that they would have some supernatural properties and create something that nature does not produce, or maybe for instance that you can put the moon, which is up in the sky, to descend into the earth and so on. So when I was trying to see that these two fields were different, and I apologize, this I take it for granted, because in the ancient Greece and actually also in Pliny the Elder, which sometimes there is not the confusion, the two things tend to be identified, and but also there was also the attempt to try to distinguish between them. And so I don't know if I clarified a little with this comment. Also, if you are interested on this, I didn't quote it because Pliny is one of the authors who actually is already, so to say, victim of the confusion between Democritus the magician and the Democritus the scientist. But there is an interesting passage that, if I recall well, is in book 10 of the Natural History, when it says that medicine started with Hippocrates and magic started with Democritus, and he uses this to say that these two fields both come from nature, but Democritus was a champion of magic and Hippocrates of medicine. And so let's say that it means that Pliny was following a tradition where Democritus, a champion of magic, was already distinguished by science, from science. And you see how intricate is the tradition, and it's very difficult to sometimes to distinguish. That's why when approaching to Democritus, I started from Theophrastus, who instead this confliction between magic and science was not already as strong as later in the Hellenistic time or in the Roman period. I don't know if I've answered it.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I missed, maybe you said it still, but maybe it's just a question of clarification.
Yeah.
Bolus, when he tried, as you claim, to attribute scientific authority to magic, did he, well, if some scholars did distinguish between magic and science, but even when they did distinguish between magic and science, they did claims that we would consider incorrect, right? But the difference for them was that they were able to explain it naturally, right?
Yeah.
So when you say that Bolus was a magician, did he try to give natural reasons, or because why do you call him a magician if it's important for him to give scientific authority to his claims?
I start by saying that actually some evidence, like the one provided at the beginning of the talk, they seems not to be physical or naturalistic claim, but actually so for instance, these are collected from Pliny in the again, if these sources attributed to Pliny are attributed to Democritus, but again, we needed to read behind the name of Democritus the name of Bolus. And some of these claims sometimes are actually, those who say, not scientific or physical claim. For instance, he say, just to make one example, that Democritus or Bolus said that if you kill a criminal and you burn the criminal into ashes and you put the ashes on the head of a person, that person will be healed by a form of by a specific disease. This is not, so to say, it's something that we will qualify as a magical remedy. Not
or a fragment.
It's a testimony. Let's say sometimes it's very difficult to distinguish, but it's Pliny saying Democritus prescribes this remedy. So it's not clear if it is a fragment or a paraphrase. Possibly it is a paraphrase, but in this example is does not matter too much. What is important is that this kind of prescription is not a prescription that we will say is a prescription of a doctor or of a philosopher or a physicist.
Because Bolus Democritus might have had a different explanation, and Pliny, who didn't distinguish between magic and science, gave a different explanation, which we would consider magic.
No, of course, but in fact, maybe, this is the very first time that I delivered this talk. So just to say that, as it oftentimes happens to the talks that you deliver for the first time. Many things have to be adjusted. The point is that it depends on the assumptions that you have. If you start from the assumption that science and magic are different, then you can try to distinguish from Bolus or Democritus what is scientific from what is magical, implying that what is magical is not scientific. Instead, an attempt is to say that these two fields maybe are just, take the example of the evil eye. What is that distinguishes that the evil eye is a spell or is a naturalistic explanation? In the case of Democritus, and this seems to be the real Democritus, the evil eye, if you can explain it with the logic of simulacra, this is not, what to say, a mere superstition belief, because you can explain it through physics. If you don't have this kind of intellectual tools with you, this could be just a folkloristic claim without any reason behind it. So again, let's say also, although the problem of this evidence is that we have different claims, and depending on how you construct the puzzle, you have different pictures. I think that in the case of Bolus was exactly trying to say, look, those people say that magic is nonsense, but actually it's not, it's a form of physics, because Democritus says this.
Without any natural explanation, just by attributing it to Democritus.
That's unfortunately, we don't know too much. I think that, when you say sympathy and antipathy, it's so to say, if you can describe as in an atomistic sense, as a form of attraction and repulsion between the, so to say, elements that are in the body. But here it's a very speculative claim that I'm making, because we don't have evidence that Bolus reasoned like this. I'm inclined to think that he did like this, because otherwise, as I was saying, why really Democritus? So he should have found in atomism something interesting to explain these patterns and these magical beliefs. But again, maybe I'm wrong.
Thank you. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I think that for some like Democritus, you could distinguish between objects and their environment.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk about both Bolus and Democritus, I wonder if there is any difference in the way they distinguish between objects and their environment, whether the explanation of sympathy and antipathy is not enough really to draw the boundaries. So how do they do it, and if they are different in that?
I'm not sure if I understood the question, so forgive me if I'm not following, please correct me. So I think that the distinction between objects and environment, again, for Bolus, we don't know. So I can speak for Democritus. So these subtleties, we can speak for the original atomism of Democritus. So to say that there is not a strict distinction between objects and the environment, for two reasons. One, that, so to say, objects are in an environment, and the affection that a person can have from an object also is based on the environmental factors. Let's return for 1 second on this mechanism that I said of the simulacra that are emitted from me and reach you. Now, you are relatively close to me, and so you can perceive me clearly. But if I, for instance, I am out of this, you look from the window, your perception of me is different from what you would have mean in this occasion, because even if the atoms that are emitted by me and reach the eyes are the same, something happens between the distance. That the atoms, for instance, are by the wind, to make an example, some are blown away, or they arrived damaged once they cross. Now the window is open, but suppose that this is closed, the simulacra, by crossing the the glass are affected also by the glass. So you see also that to try to answer the question, it's you cannot distinguish that much because also the experience of the object is dependent on the, and this is not something too different if you read Democritus, the treatise on airs, waters, and places. In my opinion, Democritus was as I tried also to show with some evidence, he had some sort of knowledge of medicine, and so he possibly he knew the treatise. And if you read the treatise, it's depending on the environment where you are, not only your disease and you are affected by a specific disease, but even the character that you have is dependent on the environment.
There's no difference between Democritus and this, or you don't know?
We don't know, unfortunately. That's it's
this could be really an important factor if you talk about magic.
Yeah.
Magline. That could be an important factor with of differentiating.
Yeah. It's a very good suggestion, also maybe I should reread by starting from this assumption also some fragments, for instance, the one, if I now find it, should be, what is it? The one about the garden and, okay, so you see that there is the passage from Columella, the 1.6 on how to create an efficient garden so that to create some, that is a reasoning about also the power of the environment and also how you construct it. But apart from this generic claim, this is the problem of working with the fragments. So also maybe I didn't stress that much in my presentation. All that I presented to you today, besides some text that I gathered, it's an hypothesis. I cannot say that my reconstruction is absolutely sound, but based on the evidence that we have, it's a good approximation. I wanted actually to add one thing about the distinction between environment and objects, so also to clarify instead a difference. So why then we can speak about an object for the case of Democritus? Because you can say, on the one hand, you can study if the same object in different environments discloses some properties that emerge in different environments. You can say that these belong to the objects. In the case of Democritus, it's even more, because for Democritus, everything, and when I say everything, I say literally this, is made of atoms and void, including the soul. And I know that this sounds puzzling, but this was the topic of my first book. Even the gods. So the gods exist, but are made of atoms and void as well. So in this case, it means that when you can, it was optimistic in this sense to say that if you try to understand what is the atomic constitution of a thing, this is independent from the environment. And you can use different signs to infer what is hidden within the object. And just I wanted to add this to...
We have a lot of questions, so let's try to
okay, sorry.
Be shorter.
This is a fascinating story. And I'm trying to articulate my discomfort with the terminology you use to tell us. And especially with it, this categorical decision, even if it's kind of fuzzy here and there between magic and science.
Yeah.
And as though science is explanatory. But take the pharmaceutical industry today, okay, which lags behind causal explanations by a decade or a decade and a half. And you find that something works, nobody understands why, you're experimenting in the dark, and so on and so forth. And nobody would call that magic, because the proof is in the repetition and the proof is the way it works. Now, many of the what you call magic in these texts, or they call magic, works. I mean, it's not, the magician pulls this out of a hat, but over and over and over again. I'm waiting to hear from Giddy on this, but even the curse bowls and so on and so forth are thought to work. So we don't have a causal, natural explanation yet. And the word you were not using was technology. Okay, so now if you add technology into the mix and distinguish between techniques which do have a scientific explanation and techniques which work perfectly, but we do not yet understand the ontology behind it, that would make for a far more subtle story of the history of what nature means and natural causes mean and what works means and what we can rely on and the kind of authority you need to bring. You weren't talking about magicians or the scientists as again individuals who have to prove their mettle and so on and so forth. So I don't know. So I expect if you were talking for 3-4 hours rather than 45 minutes, it would become richer. But you know, as the talk had it, I was uncomfortable with, you know, the sort of schematic.
Absolutely. I clarify one thing that I said that this is really a research in progress. So all the research in progress, there are some imperfections. You know, it was just even hard just to trust me to collect the evidence because you've seen that these are different writers and to make a coherent pattern for this. And that's why I said the first goal of the broader project is to collect the evidence. Without that, we cannot even, let's say, first the data and then the work. So this is a sort of first justification of this. And on the other end, there is also, so to say, it's always extremely interesting. I just, now very briefly, because I should investigate and study more. But on the one hand, in the case of Democritus, this we don't find like today this reference of experimentation and use technology for doing science. And to make an example, this metaphysical principle, the similar attracts the similar, it was based on experience and data, but not something that was made on repetition of the same phenomenon to be reproduced. So in my opinion, we are here in a way pre-scientific perspective, and so science should be interpreted also in this sense. On the other hand, I absolutely agree with your point on the idea that not every science does not necessarily mean that as an explanation, maybe there, it's was, as you said, too schematic, because in the same Democritus, actually, you can distinguish between the two forms of knowledge. The knowledge, so to say, in Greek is the Scotia gnome and the Ignesia gnome. The Scotia gnome is what appears from the senses and the reasoning about the senses, and the other is based on what is hidden in the atoms and void. What is interesting is that Democritus will claim sometimes it's scientific to say that we don't know how things are made and why things happen. So he has also this idea, but here I had to focus. I couldn't cover all the aspects of the Democritean epistemology of science, but I will surely do in the future. So thank you.
First of all, to continue with what Menachem asked, one key word here I think is physica, because physica, we translated the natural remedies or natural thing, but actually it often involves things that work, but we don't know how they work. So like the occult properties of nature or something like this. So this is just a footnote to what he asked. I wanted to ask another question. This was very interesting. I had a feeling that there are two different questions here, two different issues. One is, did Bolus of Mendes write all this stuff? And two, why was a lot of this stuff attributed to Democritus?
Yes.
Especially with the first issue, as you surely know, Max Wellman tried to reconstruct Bolus of Mendes's library already in the 1920s, and I have a feeling that scholarship abandoned that path simply because it was hopeless. There was so much material, and there was no way of really proving that Bolus really wrote it. And that's why I'm asking, why is that important? Because if they are just like with the Hippocratic corpus, there are many authors behind the Hippocratic corpus. We don't try to give them names. So why not say, well, there's the Democritean corpus. There are many writers behind it. Bolus may have been one of them, and we have no way of knowing what he wrote and what he didn't write. Because if he wrote it, he hid himself well behind the name Democritus.
Yes, no, it's absolutely correct. Actually, you've seen that I speak with fluently, and sometimes this makes me forget also some important things. Let's say that I know the scholarship of Wellman, which was already criticized by Kroll, exactly as you said, that Wellman wrote pages, 60 pages on Bolus and Anaxilaus the magician, but you say have any claim that you find in Pliny or you find in Columella or in it means that it's that for sure has been abandoned because as you said, methodologically speaking, on the one hand there are two problems. One is that we cannot be sure that everything that sounds weird belongs to Bolus. Maybe that sounds weird, but it's from Democritus. And I could make examples, but for time, don't want to abuse. Maybe I can give you some later. And on the other end, the idea that not everything that could be magical or occult properties, as you said, it's necessarily belongs to Bolus, but could be also later forgeries coming from other people. The text that I selected here, actually, in my opinion, can be attributed to Bolus, although most of these in my collection are registered as dubia, precisely because we have, so to say, if you make like the piece of the puzzle, you say, for instance, just to look at the passage from, what is it? For instance, the passage from Columella on antipathies. Columella quotes Bolus, and so it could be that this work of antipathy belongs to Bolus, or Pliny that says the Chairocmeta of Democritus. This is established that this work was by Bolus, and so since we have this, we can be not totally confident, but with a great degree that this belongs to Bolus. Although I skipped this passage, but in passage 2.5 of the handout, I quoted exactly this Zosimus of Panopolis that he uses, although it has been lost, that the same work, the Chairocmeta on that he wrote. So it could also be that other magicians, so to say, wrote similar treatises, but again, it's in fact it's it's an hypothesis, and we don't know for sure. Let's say I will put it in between not on the Wellman side, but not also too skeptic as Kroll. So a sort of virtuous mean where sometimes some sources with great caution can be attributed to Bolus, but more than that we cannot know.
Yeah, thank you. I will conclude a little bit longer. I first wanted to refer to what Menachem said. I think about the categories. So of course, you're totally right. Technology is not there because technology and science are not much connected in the period. I think that the best way to look at this, perhaps the physica is connected, is look not about science also, because it's also a little bit problematic. It will be more of natural explanation, because the way usually we think about Democritus, you try to do a little bit change, is to think that every explanation, everything that we have in the world should be explained by natural causes. We don't know them, but it should be something natural and nothing which is unnatural and which is magical. So if we this, and this I think is where the two things, and then the question is how much this kind of naturalistic view of Democritus, of the real Democritus, which we know very little about, allows for some bolus or a few boluses. It's not very important for your point to use it as why they choose this name, why other people choose to use Democritus as the name. And here I'm going to the kind of your claim, and I think that there are very important differences between your two quotes, 5 of Theophrastus Sextus, 511 and 512. Or in a sense, 512 might explain 511 and make Democritus and atomistic again. Because in 5.1 you said about something that things are similar to each other, move by similar things. This sounds very far from naturalistic. The similarities.
Sorry to clarify, you're referring to the passage from Theophrastus or from Sextus? Okay.
1.1. And Sextus Empiricus says things very similar, but when for in the middle, for example, for the second census, he said, for in the first case, because of the circular motion of the sieve, lentils separates out and are ordered together with lentils, and the barley corns and with barley corns and grains of wheat with grains of wheat. What we have here actually is a natural explanation of why the similar, or the mechanical explanation why the similar is with the similar, and the dissimilar goes out one of the other. So we have, it's a predecessor of the card.
In a way, it was looking, yes.
And of course, the card and Beckman are reading this, yes, it's not there. In the sense that we have something which the similarity is, as I said in the last part, is as though the similarity that exists in them had the capacity to bring them about. It's not the similarity really, it's as though. So then this is part of what looks as a project, the Democritean project, to explain what we see in nature, thinking that are happen also think we explain this is magic. Say no, this is not magic. This here the magician is right. It works because it gives it a naturalistic explanation. So that gives a very big gap between Democritus and the magicians.
I relatively agree, although I understand the problem, because on the one hand, I think that the second passage, so to say, integrates the first one, so to say that because the reference here is a sort of analogical reasoning to see if you go near the shore, you see this, the key word is this vortex occurring in the sea. And this same vortex, this we have some evidence that proves this, is happening all around also us. So we are the atomic motions. This is also a key difference between the Democritean atomism and the atomism of Epicurus, because Democritus had this view that there is this cosmic vortex that still is working, and that's why the atoms are continuously moving and combining and separating and so on. Because also, you know, here we have the appearance that everything is not moving, but this is, so to say, maybe I use a strong term, an illusion, in the sense that the fact that we don't see the atomic motions does not mean that the atomic motions are not occurring. So this vortex is still continuing on. And on the other hand, this vortex, so to say, in the vortex you see also different things. So why in the vortex we don't see that lentils, for instance, go with the berry corns and so on? Because so to say, in Aristotelian sense, we could say that is the vortex is a sort of efficient cause that moves things. But then how the things in this motion are put together, there is also a formal reasoning behind it. So I think that although, you know, it's again, it's an hypothesis and it's a very good point and that should be explored more, that so to say, the claim of the similarity is that, so to say, is another cause that is not in opposition to the vortex, but is in combination of this. The fact that we say, yes, though, that the similarity that exists and the capacities to bring things together, there are two. Okay, on the one hand, although it seems that I'm contradicting myself, that this, even if I put into quote the brackets, it could be that it is Sextus instead who is paraphrasing Democritus, although the key word says that the Thesine, so to say, Democritus says, but again, we cannot be sure that. So this, on the one hand, could be also a Sextus interpretation, so to say, when Democritus says this, he does not literally say that similarity is a cause. On the other hand, it will say that also it uses this kind of language because it's using a form of analogical reasoning to explain, in, so to say, in human terms, what happens in the atomic motions. So we need a sort of approximation. As I was saying to the colleague, we don't know totally what the atoms and the void are, and so we use language that are just an approximation to the natural causes. But again, maybe I'm wrong.
You see?
Two remarks, questions. I think it's really fascinating project, and sources are beautiful, but in line, I think, with Gidi's remark, I would say that it looks a little bit like an impossible project from the outset, in a way, especially since we are talking about almost mythological figures, images of thinkers, more than about any kind of traceable system of thought. So, by the way, it wasn't clear for me if you claim that Bolus himself used this pseudo-epigraphic strategy, or it's really, since we are speaking about fragments and about later historiographic tradition, it might be actually something that happens at any stage of the way. And from my experience with late Hellenistic and especially medieval practice, it's usually not the author himself who is responsible for the pseudo-epigraphy, but to the tradition. So, you know, even with much well-known authors, we have magic and science, pseudo-Albert in the 13th, 14th century all over the place. It's not normally attributed to Albert himself. It's a process of attribution and organization of materials. So, and then I think that the problem of science and magic seems to be much more complicated if you look on the inventory of the sources involved, because we are speaking about medicine, physics, alchemy, astrology, not to mention botany and mineralogy and magic. And there is a wide spectrum here between scientific and the esoteric, which needs much more clarification. Actually, as we know, there are physicians who are more oriented toward esoteric explanations or mechanisms, and the same with in all the other fields. And I ask myself if this seems to be perhaps the essence of your query, the problem of atomism. Whoever make this connection between atomism and magic, what he is really looking for in the atomistic system. So you mentioned the scientific hour, which seems to me too little for an explanation. And again, if I do analogy from medieval discussions, I would think that what it really should provide us is with a kind of meaningful explanation for causation from afar. This would be the place where, you know, from Al-Kindi and pseudo-Al-Kindi all the way to the Renaissance, you go to Neoplatonic emanation theories, etc. But in earlier phase, maybe it is exactly the atomistic theory with void and matter, and the fact that actually you can imagine a causality from afar that makes it attractive for people who are looking for model of explanation of causation, which is, let's call it for the sake of discussion, not Aristotelian in the sense of direct physical contact as actually a basic condition for any kind of causality.
No, but I absolutely agree. And, also to clarify, this is not the so to say, the only part of the project. There are also many other figures where instead so to say, this phenomenon of the nickname behind the atomism is, this is maybe I could have selected another case study. For instance, in the later immediate follower of Democritus was Metrodorus of Chios, who instead goes more in the direction of science, so to say, something that we cannot even goes to a form of skepticism, because in the form of atomism, it's also a model of explanation of causality that does not pretend to reach the absolute knowledge of things. Imagine also, there is also another aspect that here
does not support the stable mechanism.
Sorry?
And it actually does not support the stable mechanism, which is quite important and essential for magical explanation.
Yeah, but in fact, that's, so there are some aspects that you cannot find the continuity between these. Imagine, for instance, another important theory for atomism, which is the physics of the infinity. That's that's something that could, in potential, destroy also the magic, so to say, occult properties. Where do they fall if the power of infinite it's as more mysterious, so to say, as those occult properties? So just to say that here we have an aspect and a moment of a tradition, and not claiming that what I reconstructed today is the only or the only essential aspect of atomism. As required, the contrary, there are, in fact, that's why I also studied this project, Democritus and the Democritean reception, because in the reception there are sometimes even contradictory images that are coming from Democritus. Just imagine few examples. We have here the Democritus the magician, but later you have the Democritus the Christian even, or Democritus who laughs at people, or Democritus as the hyper-rationalist of Galileo and other physicists who were only interested in Democritus for the distinction, for instance, on the primary and secondary causes, and not of this. So it's an intricate tradition, and that's why I say should be a wider project, because this one it gives us just a part of the story. This moment should be also put into a larger framework where you can also explain why in this specific, if we locate Bolus in the 4th and 3rd century, why this image appeared in these centuries, and later another image superseded or refined this. So again, maybe this I should have stated that this is a case study, is not, so to say, I don't think that this is the only, so to say, fulfills the connection between atomism. Some other strands of atomism, you cannot find the continuity. I don't know if I've answered someone.
Could you say perhaps one word about the overall project?
Sorry?
Could you say one word about the large project? What is the overall project?
Well, the overall project is, so to say, on the one hand, is to, as I said, to collect, to make this a new collection of the ancient atomists. And this we can collect everything and try to have all the data to do scholarship. And again, not the immediate scholarship will be as perfect as, but that's what, in the prospect, the idea that this will have a larger impact, and also other scholars will continue. And then to explore exactly this intricate tradition that prospectively shows that Democritus had an impact. Retrospectively can try to highlight how atomism of Democritus was extremely complex, because it exactly generated these different strengths.
We have 2 minutes, so I'll ask a question. I'm sure you won't be able to answer it shortly, so I'll ask the question, maybe we'll talk about it over dinner. And I think the reason to take Democritus as someone who you won't find antipathies and sympathies is because he's depicted as someone who's answering Parmenides and saying that, and Zeno, Zeno and saying that they have these indestructible parts, the atoms, and we have the voids. And in the metaphysics suggests that you won't have anything like in the metaphysics corresponding to sympathies and antipathies, or to anything that looks like attraction or repulsion. I think I find your story a bit too speculative, given that the metaphysical background is not allowing us to find any place for sympathies and antipathies, or anything like you would find in a corpus including, I don't even need to call it magic, but it could be a different kind of science.
Yeah, but
So my question is, isn't the metaphysics that is supposedly associated with alchemism something that not allowing for a story to take place?
no, but again, I repeat what I said to the colleague. I isolated here an aspect of atomism. I don't say that this fulfills. So this case study of Bolus and atomism can explain why there has been a disconnection. But there are also, as you said, there is a lot of scholarship on the Parmenidean background of atomism, in the sense that the atoms are exactly like the Parmenidean being, they cannot be changed and so on. But even in Parmenides, for instance, in the second half of the poem, you find some other claims that are not metaphysically extreme, like the part explaining what being is. And sometimes you can even find attributed to Parmenides even this mechanism. If I recall correctly, Theophrastus attributes to Parmenides also this belief on the perception by similarity and so on. So again, I'm not saying that these 45 minutes explains everything about atomism, just one aspect. And I was, let's say, here I was more interested in Bolus and his idea. If I would more interested in Democritus and relationship with magic, many other things could have been done, but that's why I started from the other way around. I don't know if, but maybe it's a long.
Yeah, thank you very much. אנחנו הולכים, החוג הצפוני סגור, ואנחנו לא יכולים ללכת לשם, אבל אנחנו הולכים לקפה דאטה. יש מספר מצומצם של מקומות בשולחן, אז מי שרוצה להצטרף אלינו שיבוא אליי ויגיד שהוא רוצה להצטרף, ונלך לשם במקום החוג הצפוני. תודה.